planes, trains, cars, boats, furry critters, and of course, plenty of video games. These are only some of the things to look forward to on this, our epic first time journey to Perth, Australia. Perth is a whopping 5-hour flight from Sydney, but the semi-good news is that Sydney Airport has some pretty good food and shopping options. You can easily burn through a bit of time shopping around the joint. We stocked up on some epic donuts and burgers for our flight. And we also checked out this cool little Lego store, which had some really nice sets, but we were just starting on the trip, so it didn't make much sense to buy anything just yet. But maybe on the trip back. I love the look of this jungle set. Now I don't mind a bit of plane spotting, so we had some time to burn, which was a good opportunity to check out the action on the tarmac. And a pretty standard 5-hour flight later, and we'd landed in Perth. And man, this city is really beautiful. Being an East Coaster, it'd be fair to say no one really talks about visiting Perth too often, but parts of the city are wonderful, with a good mix of modern shopping and historic sites to see. But before we go sightseeing and do holiday stuff, let's check out the retro game hunting plan. Here's the to-do list. First up, we'll check out a place called Mad Retro, located inside a railway market. Next, we'll visit 8-Bit Anarchy, a smaller store that also has some music and vintage gear. We'll next check out a chain store called Beyond Retro, located in a shopping centre. And finally, it's on to a place called Retro Collect in the suburb of Mount Lawley. But before we get to all that, we had a few days free to see what Perth and its surround was all about, as this trip wasn't just about gaming, it was a family holiday and a first-time visit to Perth. We first wandered down to Hay Street Mall and came across a historic-looking mall called London Court. It's an old-style British alley of shops. Probably Perth's closest thing to Diagon Alley. We thought we'd wander down to the water, so we stopped to admire some of the street art and historic architecture. Arriving at the waterfront down at Elizabeth Quay was an eye-opener. You get a real feel for the beauty of the Swan River. There's a nice collection of sightseeing and restaurants down here, but we mainly just wandered around looking at the various sites, including this intriguing modern bell tower, a futuristic-looking bridge walkway, and the odd piece of bird art. Eventually, we found our way up to Kings Park for a view of the city and the river. Kings Park is a treasure. It's got a botanical gardens, a war memorial, restaurant and cafes, and even this beautiful 750-year-old boab tree named Giga Jamulu. The next day, we had an amazing souffle pancake breakfast, which I highly recommend. Yeah, look, it's fine to eat this stuff when you're on holiday, right? We hopped on a train towards Fremantle, which is a suburb to the south of the city. We weren't going to spend too much time down there today, as we needed to catch a ferry over to Rottnest Island, but it is very pretty, and the buildings tell a story of a historic past. We walked over to the ferry docks and had some time to burn, so I found a pretty cool vintage market, and man, it has all sorts of stuff. There was vintage clothing and furniture, toys and collectibles, tourist souvenirs, way too much candy for one person, more toys and collectibles, including this Star Trek stuff, old VHSs, MASH anyone? And yeah, even some video games. But I decided against stuffing my pockets, because we had a ferry to catch. The docks are quite a sight. Fremantle is a shipping town, so you actually see freighters alongside smaller watercraft like our ferry.
In the unlikely event of emergency, leave the main mast and follow instructions by the crew or captain.
We head out past the pier, and before you know it, we're out on the open sea. Now, I don't actually get seasick, but luckily for everyone else on board, the boat wasn't overly rocky. and after about 20 minutes or so, we arrive into the calmer shoals and crystal blue waters of Rottnest Island. And arriving at Rottnest, I was not disappointed. The weather was actually a fair bit warmer than the mainland, which was a surprise. In the photo here you can just make out Perth in the distance. Then it was time to check into our hotel, a place called the Samphire, and it's a wonderful new resort style place. It's got a pretty sweet pool and even its own private beach, which we made the most of. And since the weather was great, we decided it was best to make the most of it and get out and explore the island. The best way to do this is definitely to rent some bikes. I should explain that cars are actually banned from the island, so the only way you'll get around is either by bicycle or a tour bus. But riding around on bikes does not disappoint. We essentially just followed the coast and rode from one deserted private beach to the next. Now, I should explain, we were here in the off-season. We were told by locals that Rottnest gets super busy over the holidays. And now, one of the main reasons tourists at least travel here is to meet the quokkas, of course. You may have seen people taking selfies with these smiling little marsupials, and it's definitely worth trying to get up close. A word of warning though, it's illegal to pat or touch them, but hey, if you hang around for a while, you may just have a close encounter of the cute marsupial kind, like I did here. Apparently. And finally, after a day of exploring, we headed back to the hotel restaurant to watch the day come to a close. The following day we were back on the mainland and rented a car to do some more exploring. We headed south to check out some regrowth rainforest. We also made a stop at the southwesternmost point of Australia. And we explored some caves. This one was called Mammoth and it held some surprising secrets. But hey, sightseeing stuff aside, it was time to get onto the gaming stuff. So I headed to the railway markets. It's essentially a huge warehouse, which perhaps used to be a train storage facility. I'm not too sure, but they had an actual steam train inside, as well as all of these small style market shops, including some half decent takeaway food places. But it was a shop called Mad Retro that I was looking for. And stepping inside this unassuming shopfront, you find this smaller type shop and it's just stacked with retro games. There's a wall of boxed N64 stuff, Mega Drive, NES, both loose and boxed, 3DS, DS, GameCube, Wii U, consoles, pop vinyl. And of course there's plenty of PlayStation stuff across the generations. In the middle of the shop, they've got a loose bin of various bits and pieces. We'll come back to this in a bit. And then rows and rows of SNES and N64 loose carts. The thing that was genuinely shocking about these was the price. Absolute bargains here. I've got to say, it's not often you see loose carts for $10 and $15 in Australian stores these days. But back to that loose item bin, they had some real bargain stuff, like various memory carts, and even some random boxed Famicom stuff. I believe that's Kaguya Hime Densetsu down the bottom. As well as some Atari carts going for real cheap. I've already mentioned the huge range of PlayStation, mostly PS2. The shop wasn't huge, but it wasn't all bargain loose stuff. In fact, at the front counter they had some better quality sealed items. These prices are pretty standard, but definitely out of my range. It was also nice to see some modern Switch titles, including Bomberman and Mario Kart 8. As well as some Link stuff, including Hard Drivin' and California Games. Their portable section was pretty tempting, especially those colourful Game Boys. Here's what was on offer at the NES section. And here's part of the Sega section. There were a lot more Mega Drive games, but I've been looking for Mega CD recently, and yeah, there wasn't a heap available. And that about wraps it up from Mad Retro. The next stop is another unassuming shop front of a place called 8-Bit Anarchy. And wow, This place is next level. And when I say next level, I mean some really nice items that were way out of my price budget. What I loved about this shop is they definitely still have a love of Sega, whereas the last store seemed a bit more Nintendo focused. But yeah, I ended up having a bit of a chat to the shop assistant, and he was right into his Sega. We talked about how underrated the Master System was, and he's part of their Sega stock. And here's some more behind glass. They had Comic Zone and Ultima 4, as well as some 32X titles. It was nice to see Mega Drive import carts, including Japanese and American titles. Behind the front counter they had some boxed Game Boy and other Nintendo stuff that looked pretty mint. I really dig the layout of the games in this store. It's really packed to the rafters, with so many things, your eyes just don't know which way to look. It was also good to see they've taken care to clean and wrap all their loose carts. Now, I did already mention the mint box Nintendo titles in stock, including Super Metroid, Star Wing, Donkey Kong 3, Mario Kart, and Castlevania. Yeah, that pile will definitely hurt the wallet. And here's some of the accessories and random game stuff they have. But speaking of hurting the wallet, check out this Sharp Twin Famicom in pretty good condition. Man, I love these things, but if I ever get one, it'll definitely be the orange colour variety spec. And here's some random old school Viewmasters with Nintendo's Oil Panic and Safe Buster Game & Watches. As well as a great collection of games, 8-Bit Anarchy also had some rad collectibles. If only I could fit these two in my luggage. But hey, there's still other shops to visit. My next stop was a small chain called Beyond Retro, which was located in a shopping centre. Walking into this store was great. Now it's clear this is the biggest of the retro shops we've visited so far. It's basically the size of an EB Games, but full of retro gear. They have some really deep stock in regards to accessories, collectibles, and even print media. Now I think this place is more focused on later retro games because their PlayStation collection was absolutely huge. But luckily they did still have a few choice Nintendo items, including NES, Super Nintendo, N64, including some boxed items. Overall, the size of this place means they can fit more in, so it's probably a good shop to come to if you're looking for a gift, for example, and need a wide selection of options. Now, being a Sega guy, I did actually manage to find a small selection of Sega items, Master System, Mega Drive, Mega CD, and a Saturn title too, including Tomb Raider. Sadly, nothing was on my list in this section. But it was off to my next stop, a medium-sized store called Retro Collect. Now, I've got to be honest, I was a little shopped out at this point. I didn't really think that I'd find anything new or interesting after visiting 3 pretty unique gaming stores. And I've got to say, I'm thankful I persisted. Retro Collect has a really solid collection, low tier to high tier boxed, stacks of collectibles, accessories, consoles. They pretty much had games for every console and handheld. I mean, they even had boxed Atari stuff. How often do you see that? And all at a pretty good price point. And yeah, an important part for me was they had a pretty good collection of Sega stuff, which I was delighted to see. Some standouts were Mortal Kombat, Ghouls and Ghosts, World of Illusion on the Mega Drive, SimCity 2000 Theme Park and MechWarrior 2 on the Saturn, Alex Kidd in Shinobi World, Rampage and Paperboy on the Master System. They had an array of Nintendo handhelds, boxed Nintendo, loose Game Gear, random accessories, and plenty of SNES, and even a few Mega CD titles. There were a heap of PS2 titles as well, maybe even more than Beyond Retro. Now their N64 section was particularly impressive. Super Ghouls and Ghosts, complete in box for $140 is pretty good for an Australian store. And they even had this funky official licensed storage tower in box. There really is too much to see at this store. I kind of want to go back because even in putting together this video, I'm wondering why I didn't get this or that item. I guess that's the general problem when travelling. You've only got a suitcase worth of room. I guess in the future I should probably pre-plan and pack an empty suitcase. And before we knew it, the day was over and it was our last night in Perth, WA. Overall, it was a wonderful and relaxing trip. The weather and scenery were definitely highlights, whilst the gaming shops on offer were a genuine surprise. And I've got to say, as we sat on our flight home, it left me wondering, is Perth the retro gaming capital of Australia? I guess we'll have to visit all the other cities to compare. And finally, what games did I end up getting? Well, I actually surprised myself in that I ended up getting a bunch of Nintendo titles. Ski or Die is a game I loved on PC back in the 90s, and I saw the loose cart for cheap, so I thought, why not grab it? It's a super fun game, and along with its sister title Skate or Die, can only be described by that true 90s parlance as totally radical. Castlevania. Yeah, I think out of all the game series that I haven't finished, this one intrigues me the most. So I grabbed the loose cart for a pretty standard price. Castlevania is raved about when people talk about classic game series, so I'm really looking forward to a playthrough of this one. Yep, another NES title. Back in the early 90s when I went over a friend's place who owned a NES, I distinctly remember playing Mario, Zelda, and this pretty underrated title called Rad Racer. I believe it came out after Outrun on the Master System, but I reckon it's just as enjoyable. This one was complete in box, not in the best condition, but I thought it'd be nice in the collection regardless. Yeah, it's true, I haven't had any N64 content on this channel so far, but I do own the console, and of course everyone has played GoldenEye, right? Mostly it was multiplayer for me back in the day, but I've never actually sat down to give the single player campaign a go, and people speak of it highly. I saw this completing box on the shelf, and the price was right, so I bagged it. Rampage on the Master System. This alternative box cover caught my eye, and it's another title I remember playing on a rented Master System from Video Easy back in the 90s. This is a genuinely fun two-player game, and it must own for any Master System owner, I reckon. And yeah, finally, being a Sega guy, I did have my eyes peeled for something on my wish list for this trip, and when I saw Ultima 4 complete in box, I knew I had to have it. I mentioned in a PC Powerplay Let's Read recently that this is one series that is on my to-do list to play through from the start. I do love my Master System, so I reckon the plan will be to play through them all on PC except this game. Ultima, of course, is a total classic and timeless RPG. RPGs aren't for everyone, but I do love giving them the time when I have it, and the payoff is usually worth it. And that's all for my trip from Perth, Western Australia. Hope you liked the video, and thanks for watching.